Next up, we have Alicia Rushkovska. A little bit about Alicia. She's gone through multiple careers in tech until she finally landed on a DevOps role and loved it. She resides in Vancouver, British Columbia, where she works on infrastructure. And in her free time, she plays the ukulele, crochets cute animals, and tries to watercolor. She's going to let you know how you can support immigrant team members. Take it away, Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia, and I'm going to talk today about supporting your immigrant team members. I am an immigrant myself. I moved to Canada a little bit less than 3 years ago, and I've been in Vancouver, BC ever since. And I'm currently on my second Canadian job. I work in DevOps at Clio, which is a Canadian company that builds software for lawyers. And I wanted to talk about this topic because it's both my shared experience of being an immigrant and working through that, and also my experience of people supporting me through that and helping me get to where I am and thrive. And I think a lot of those strategies and ideas might be useful for other people as well. I would like to thank the organizers. I think there is the organizing work that I should thank them for first, that often invisible work that goes into making a conference happen, of getting the speakers or just like the timetables of everything and putting on a website and getting folks interested and wanting to take part in it. And there's a lot of that. And I know that because I sometimes organize conferences too. But maybe predominantly, I think I want to thank them for organizing a conference that's focusing on building communities in tech and how we communicate, because we rarely get dedicated spaces for that are so big and focused. We can get, a side conference track, maybe a presentation, maybe a workshop, but having this bigger conversation and having it be center stage, it's what's important for me. So thank you for doing that. I would also like to just point out that, I'm an immigrant and I'm a woman and I work in tech, and all of that makes my experience helpful to understand certain contexts and relevant, but there are many ways in which I am privileged. So when you're thinking about supporting your team members, try to understand what their situation is and try to talk to a more diverse group of people who have lived through this experience. And maybe not all of them have to be white and European or cisgender or able-bodied, and have a pretty easy time coming to a new country without worrying about finding a job right away. So just keep that at the back of your mind, that when I talk about it, I mostly talk about my own experience, and it would be great if you just reached out to other people or educated yourself more on other people's experiences. I'm going to be talking about what immigration is, why do people migrate, what it is like to be an immigrant in a new country, and maybe some strategies that you could use if you're an immigrant, to try and find a place for yourself to thrive. And I'm also going to talk about some strategies that if you are a team member of an immigrant, you could think about using them to support them and to have a stronger connection. If any of those topics makes you uncomfortable, please make sure you're only watching this talk if it doesn't make you too uncomfortable. And if it does, just feel free to drop off. I won't mind. I want you to be here in a place that lets you learn and explore this topic and not be stressed about it or worry about anything triggering happening. And I think the main thing I would like you to take away from this presentation is curiosity. So curiosity is something that helps us connect as humans in general, no matter in what situations we meet and how we interact with each other. And even if you don't know what to do, or you've never done it before, or you're not sure what someone's going through, being curious and being there for them is going to help a lot more than knowing all those things. So if nothing else, try to be curious about their experience. So what is immigration? Why do people do it? Immigration is moving to a different country, and essentially it's any move. It's not only people moving for work or people moving for education. It's anyone moving somewhere for a few years and switching cultures and switching the context. And immigration is especially visible in Canada and in the United States because there are a lot of people who are migrants here. If you look at Canada, there's over 7.5 million of us, and about 22% of the society is first generation immigrants, and about 18% is second generation. Whereas in the US, the percentages might be smaller, but the number of people is way higher. It's about 40 million people in the US who are first generation immigrants. That's a lot of people, and that means you probably are encountering some of them day to day. And some of them might be your teammates, or they might just be people you meet in various situations. And it's not a bad thing to notice that they're slightly different when it comes to the culture or the way they communicate. It's perfectly natural to see that someone is an immigrant and maybe try to understand their experience. And we as North Americans, the new immigrants and the established immigrants and the few generations in immigrants, are sharing that experience of trying to understand our cultures and interacting with each other on a daily basis. So there's definitely a lot of us here. And it's something that impacts a lot of people in the society, and that's why I think it's important. There is often a lot of conversations around why people migrate, and a lot of them focus on the opportunities, they making more money, they're having a better life. And yeah, fair, that's important, right? A lot of people migrate because of that. But try to remember that some people migrate because of safety. They are not safe in the country or the situation they're in. Maybe they're facing persecution. Maybe there are economical issues or climate change issues that they have to move away from. Maybe some of them are here for opportunities, not for themselves, but for their children or other family members. And some of them, like me, are just here because they're curious. There was really no reason why I moved to Canada other than my partner being here. And it was my choice that I made from a very comfortable place. I could have just stayed in Poland, and I think my life would be great too. So it's not always about moving to somewhere that's better. And also that better is not always defined simply by work or opportunities or making more money. There are various reasons why people move. So try not to assume you know why they did it. And it's hard. I have a lot to say about it, so I'm going to try and be brief because we really want to focus on some solutions here and not just saying how hard it is to do it. But keep that in mind. It's switching cultures. It's going somewhere that you don't have an established relationship with a lot of people. You don't have a lot of work history. In many ways that's freeing. But at the same time, it puts that much more work on you to just have the daily interactions that you're used to, that were maybe so much easier in the culture that you were coming from. And often you have to do it in a different language and with people who notice that you look differently or you speak differently, or there are so many things about you that they notice that wouldn't have been something you have to think about in your previous context. So it's hard. It's hard in different ways and different levels on anyone who's experiencing it. But nevertheless, don't assume that, it's easier because this person is this and that, or it's harder for that person because of something else. Just try to see the person and not the system, and get curious about why it might be particularly hard or maybe easier for them. And just keep in mind it's still hard, no matter if it's easier or not. It's still a hard thing to do. The process is very stressful and transactional. You have to prove that you deserve to be in your new country. And in different countries, it's a different cost and a different process. But in general, countries want immigrants that are going to benefit them, the culture, the economy. in many ways. And this process is for us to prove that we deserve to be part of this new culture, and we're not going to be a burden for the new culture. One of the reasons you can be rejected in the immigration process is because you have medical issues and the country that is accepting you decides, oh, we don't want to bear that cost, that's too high, so we're not going to accept you in our country. And that's heartbreaking, right? Because you can't actually control that in many cases. So we're going through a process in which we have to document and prove our skills, our background, our abilities, why we want to do it, that we know we can support ourselves, that we deserve to be here. And that in itself is sometimes very dehumanizing, even though at the end of the day, it's humans who make those decisions for us. Secondly, it's very visibly impacting your well-being. Like, this is my heart rate. This is my heart rate for the first year of my immigration journey. First, when I was considering moving, and then I decided, and I had to tell it to my family, and I was preparing, and then I actually moved, and it was very hard at first, and it sort of got easier. I was like, oh, maybe I will never get a job and I'll just stay home forever. And it got stressful again because I'm not the kind of person who can live without a job. And it was visibly impacting my mood and my interactions with my partner. And just in general, it was physically hard on my body. It's not just something that's maybe stressful, mentally hard. That stress actually has impact on your actual health. So remember that any change can cause stress like this, and immigration is no different. The process of immigration is, initially you might be very excited and very happy, and you go and on that ride and you move somewhere, and then you start experiencing things you didn't expect, and then it gets harder, and then you sort of get annoyed and angry and frustrated at the same time. And it can go either way. You can either break through that and then find a way to be happy in your country and find a way to be thriving there. Or in some cases, it can just stay like that forever or get worse. And then some people decide to move back to where they came from. So you definitely want your team members to be on that first progression. You want to, even if they're frustrated, even if it's hard for them in the moment, you want to help them get to that happy place where they can thrive and support other team members and just be themselves at work and be productive. So even when you settle in, those challenges just keep coming, right? You have that blank slate at first, which is great because yay, freedom. I don't have any bad history here. I can just be myself. But in being yourself comes with a lot of cost of proving who you are, and then not understanding why people don't see it, or they see certain things about you that you don't think are true, and just constantly struggling with that. So that blank slate is kind of a double-edged sword. It's great, but it's also very hard to establish yourself in a new country. And then even when you're establishing yourself and you're learning those things, there are culture shocks coming. And in my experience, they're not ending. I still find things that are shocking for me in Canada. And I've kind of accepted by now that they're never going to end, and there's always going to be something. Even when I lived here and I read books and I've seen movies, even after a few years of being here, there are still things in Canada that shock me from time to time. And then you never really stop being homesick, and it can get more intense. So, you miss your family, you miss your friends, you miss things you like, but then you might start missing things you never thought you would like. Like, I started missing folk culture, and I started buying Polish things that I would never buy living in Poland. But now they're in my house just because that brings me closer to my culture. But then even if I go back to my culture, if I visit my family, I'm an outsider. And that has been a shocking experience for me, because all those little changes that are accumulating in this process, you don't really see them day to day. And suddenly you go visit and a person in the store looks at you weird because you keep smiling at them and asking how are they doing, which is not something you do in Poland in a store. Um, so there's some things you can do to work through that. Some things I've done that helped me, and I also know other immigrants that have went through that. First of all, you have to kind of embrace the change. And I'm not saying like you always have to be happy about it and you have to keep positive. There are going to be better days and worse days. But it's more about accepting that this is just going to be the state it's in. I don't know, maybe it ends after 20 years of being in a country. I haven't done that yet. But I would assume that for the time being, like those issues you're experiencing are just going to be your lived experience, and finding strategies to work around them or maybe work through them and embrace them are going to be much more impactful in a positive way than fighting against them and trying to change things. There are certain things you can't change about a culture. Like I cannot change the fact that the tax is not included in price here, no matter how much I miss that and how much it irritates me to do that mental math every time I pay for something. That's something I can't change, and I have to accept that. Secondly, try to build up your confidence. Like you've done something super hard. You have moved countries. You've moved cultures. You see things that other people don't see because they irritate you, but also because they're interesting and new. It's something that a lot of people around you haven't done. Like they've done similar things, definitely. They've challenged themselves, but maybe not always to that extent. You can prove you can learn things, because what's harder than moving countries, working in a new language and a new culture and struggling with that every day and having to learn how to communicate and how to do your job in the middle of all of that. On top of all that, you have to also be a professional that performs in the job. And just notice how much you're changing and that you have done a lot of hard things. One of them is figuring out the immigration system, which is absolutely awful, I think, in any country, but especially so in the US, as far as I know from my friends. So try to remember that you've done something amazing and you're great, and just build that confidence, because immigration is a great thing for your growth and you've done a lot. And don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Then to get that strength and get that confidence, try to find spaces for yourself. Spaces that have to do with your culture, like friends who speak your language, or food that tastes like the food at home. Trying to find a space for your personal goals where you can work on something that has nothing to do with being an immigrant or being in this new culture or anything around growing that. Just growing your own interests and your own skills for yourself, and having that core you that's maybe neither of the cultures, so both of them at the same time. And also try to find spaces in the new culture that will allow you to explore and ask questions in a safe way, and also start understanding some of those tricky cultural differences that you are facing. But never forget to cultivate your quirks. Never forget those little things that, maybe come from your culture or your family that make you you. Like not wearing shoes in the house is the thing that I always do. I talk a lot about air pressure because that's what Polish people do. Or I just do diminutives of any word. And if I don't have them in English, I'll switch to Polish because I just communicate in that way a lot. Those little quirks help you center yourself in like being you and what's you, and you get to choose which ones you keep and which ones you change and which ones you accept from the new culture. And it's for you to define your identity and for you to decide what you want to keep and what you want to change. Be ready to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. And I think it's important to learn how to recover from them more so than avoid making them. If you're just embarrassed and you said something silly, try to just, make it quick and sweet. Just say, oh, that was not what I meant. That was silly. Haha, move on. They're embarrassing, they're uncomfortable, but they're going to happen a lot. Like I mispronounce things all the time. If it's something that you thought you understood, but you actually didn't, and it comes from a point of ignorance, which means you just don't know as much as you knew about something, just embrace that. Say, I don't know, ask people for help and learn it. That's going to help you grow much more than explaining, oh, I don't know because I'm from this culture. And it makes that conversation harder. And then thirdly, there are situations in which maybe it's different in your culture than the culture you came to. when you wronged someone, there's this urge to explain why you did that and why you misunderstood. And I would just say, yeah, people know that. They know you're from a different culture, but also there is an impact that your actions had, and it's more important to address that than to focus on discussing the cultural differences. So, try to make mistakes and iterate and not get hung up on them, because that will just maybe grow that frustration or keep you from embracing the new culture and the situation you're in. And lastly, you are empowered to set expectations for your teammates, and just do that clearly, like preferably as early as possible. Talk to them about the way you want to communicate, maybe some boundaries you have, especially ones that they might not expect, and just tell them this is what you expect, and you'll give them space to learn as they are giving you space to learn this new culture, and try to just make this relationship work over time and help them understand what you need. You can expect things from them too. It's not only about you adjusting to the new culture. And yes, they can expect things from you, and some of them are going to be people specific, not culture specific. So try to have that relationship defined early on and make sure that you're communicating clearly around those boundaries. So speaking of your teammates, if you grew up in a culture, it's the way of life of the group of people that you grew up with, right? It's very hard to see outside of that culture. And I mean, that's any culture. Like, it was very hard for me to see outside of the Polish culture. It's not about being from a particular country. It's more about we as humans grow up in cultures. So when you grow up in a culture, there are three main areas in which that culture is visible. There's the language, either a particular language or maybe an accent or maybe some specific grammar forms you're using. There's the social system in which you grow up and you kind of assume this is the default for solving these kinds of social issues. And then there are the customs and norms, which is, expecting certain behaviors in specific contexts. So let me give you a few brief examples of how I experienced that as an immigrant. Language is often a very interesting point of communication for me with other people, because my accent is kind of nondescript and their instinct is to try to figure out where I'm from, which I think most of the time is a positive thing, but sometimes it kind of places me in some sort of hierarchy that they think of when they think of different countries and different cultures, especially so in Europe, because in Europe people have more prejudice about Polish people and how we are like specifically, less so in Canada and the US. And I wouldn't say that is a bad intention, but that has a measurable impact on how I communicate with people and how they see me. So when you notice yourself doing that, just be aware of it. I think is the most important thing. Even if you can't fix noticing things. Like, it's not a thing to fix. You just need to embrace the fact that you've noticed them and then try not to necessarily act on them, right? Remind yourself that you make grammar mistakes too, and that English is a very hard language and it's very different in different countries. Just be ready to answer questions, to ask questions if you misunderstood someone. Be open to the fact that language is a frame that you have that for someone else is a frame that they have to grow into. And it's always going to have some problems, and just being open to questions and providing resources for people to learn. Like my team provides it for me in the group chat where I ask questions all the time, is going to help them grow. The other thing I mentioned is the social system. For me, the biggest example of that is the work environment. In Poland, what's considered work environment is much more specific. It's a full-time employment contract. It has a certain assumption about vacation days, overtime and whatnot, and it's by law. So it's not employer specific. It is very much defined in law. And that was a very different frame for when I came to Canada and I first encountered the different contracts we have around work here. And that's for any system. Like, any system at the very beginning might seem very hard because you don't really know the rules of the system and you need to gather a lot of information. So to help your team members work through that, just try to figure out steps there that you're not noticing anymore because you've been doing them for a while. Like, you know how work contract works because you've been working, you know how to get to, a medical center and get help because you've done that. But someone who's new doesn't necessarily know it, and it's not, the way you do it in your culture is not necessarily obvious. So try to help them build that ladder to get started on that task. And then I know the social norms in Canada, and I also know the social norms in Poland. And the fact that I know them is sometimes not helpful because they might be conflicting. There are different ways of reacting to things in Poland than there are in Canada. So as simple as how are you? In Canada, we kind of expect an answer that's, nondescript and it's kind of a greeting. But in Poland, that implies you're actually curious how someone feels and you're in for an answer. So remember that whenever you ask me a question like that, like I might know the proper Canadian form or American form, but I'm also coming from a culture that has a different approach to it. And sometimes I'll just mix them up or forget, or one of them will take over. And even if I logically know something, I've lived way more through the Polish experience of that. And that's my instinct when reacting to things. So, keeping in mind that if someone crosses the norm that hurt someone else, that's the most important thing that's happening in the moment. So try to, not use that as an excuse for a behavior that's just unacceptable. But if it hasn't crossed the line, just try to be curious, like what's happening there? Is it cultural difference? Is it a language issue? Did they intend to do something else? Did they blurt out something weird? A lot of things can happen. And sometimes it's just wiring in my brain works differently on a given day. And I say something stupid and I'm like, oh, right. That was not the Canadian thing to say. And then I tell everyone on my team, I'm having a Polish day. I'm sorry, I can't think in Canadian today. And it's fine. Those days happen. So what are some other things you can try and do? I think the first thing is to find a curiosity lens. So try to find an experience that's similar to what your team members are going through, like moving cities, changing schools, switching jobs, and just remember how you felt in that situation and use it as a way to understand their experience by at the same time not belittling it and saying, oh, I know how that works. I moved schools, or that's not what we're looking for here. Just try to use it as a starting point for a conversation and say, oh, I don't actually understand. Like I had a similar experience, but I think yours is different. But if we find some ways they are similar, it's going to help me empathize more and understand what you're going through. Secondly, take a holistic view. I know you want to help your teammates. Just remember that they're balancing, and everyone is balancing, learning and safety. Yes, they want to learn and they want to do great in this new culture and support the team, but there's only so much learning they can take at the same time. And if you make this balance unstable, it can just have a negative impact on their life. So remember they're probably also facing other things outside of work or maybe at work with other teammates, and there's only so much they can take. So try to make this relationship work long-term and work through small changes rather than piling everything up, because then this balance just topples over and it makes it way more stressful. Try to spark genuine curiosity. So I don't mean like go to your teammates, have a list of questions and ask them like, oh, I want to learn this and that thing about your country. Because while you might be genuinely curious, that might not come off as such to them. Try to find the moments in which they are opening up their culture and their ideas to you. Like they're cooking something and you're learning a new dish from them, or, they're celebrating a holiday, or they used an emoji and you don't understand what they meant. Try to pick those moments and understand what it was about, because sometimes it's not about the culture at all. Like I don't only cook Polish food, I cook a lot of different food. So it's not necessarily about me being Polish or being an immigrant. So try to just get curious and ask them questions and understand where they're coming from and what they're up to. And again, build that over time. Don't pile it up, because that might make for a very uncomfortable conversation for everyone involved. Know yourself in the situation. Know what you are comfortable with and which hard topics you're ready to talk about. There are topics that come up on my team that not everyone wants to chat about, that I usually ask when I needed someone to help me with figuring out medical help. I asked if there's anyone who wants to do that and is comfortable with doing that, because that's a topic not everyone wants to talk about. So try to figure out what you're comfortable with and communicate that. And also, if you change your mind, that's also fine. Just communicate that you changed your mind. And remember about the context you have this conversation in. So if it's a hard topic for you, it might be for your teammates as well. So maybe a better way of talking about it is on a video call rather than in the group chat with everyone there. And also remember that's something that might be hard for you. In the other culture, it might be very easy to, like, it's very easy for me to talk about money, which is not necessarily a Polish thing, it's more of a me thing. And I find it very hard sometimes to remember that maybe that's not a topic everyone wants to talk about. You also need to be ready to make mistakes. And I would say the mistakes you might be making in this relationship are the reverse of the mistakes I was talking about when speaking about an immigrant experience. So you're always going to have some prejudice, and sometimes you're going to act on it, and that's fine. Like, you're going to make those mistakes. You can't escape them, but try to recognize when that happens. When you're generalizing, like you're saying, all Polish people do this thing because this one Polish person I know, that's the thing. Or you're assuming, oh, this person knew what they were doing and they did it on purpose, when they actually just did something because they didn't understand what a custom is and they were lost and they were trying to figure out the situation. Or when they don't understand you and don't do something when you thought they would do it, not because they didn't mean to understand you, didn't want to help you, but because they just misunderstood what you meant. Maybe you were very vague. Maybe you said something as a question and you actually meant it as something they need to do, which happens to me a lot. Sometimes I need to ask, is that a suggestion? Or do you actually want me to do that? Because if it's not something I have to do, I might do something else because I make decisions on how I work. So try to be clear and just stop yourself before reacting and try to find a lens through it. Makes sense that they had the right intentions and then there was some sort of misalignment in communication. And lastly, learn from other sources and other stories. As I said at the beginning of this talk, I am a very specific person with a very specific experience. And this talk might not click for you. And there might be something else that clicks for you, like work on your communication skills in general, because communicating with any team member is about your communication skills. Listening to other immigrants, looking at data, talking to experts. There's so many ways that you can engage with this topic. So try to engage in different ways. If this talk worked for you or it didn't work for you, just try to figure out other ways you can get informed and keep yourself informed. And just remember to spark curiosity whatever you're doing to make it better. And I think by now you see that this talk was more about supporting your team members, any team members, new team members you maybe didn't have the best relationship with, someone that you had a conflict with, just anyone on your team. And the immigration lens here is just one of many lenses that can happen in a work context. And it's not necessarily worse or better or special, it's just different. So giving you some context of that, I think, was helpful. But also remember that any of the strategies and any of those ideas work just well for your team, for communicating and supporting your team members. So for me, the best thing that helped me was just learning about communication skills and learning about supporting other people, regardless of the context in which I was doing that. So you don't only have to use those strategies to support your immigrant team members or understand them, just support your team members with a lot of curiosity and being there for them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alicia, for that. That was a great talk. And I really liked a lot of these points, and interesting. I think even some of them can still apply to new jobs and communities as other things. They can have a lot of their own cultures when you move into them as well, and you may not know them, but I definitely love the specific call out to immigrants and them. Alicia, are you there? And are you unmuted? I think I need to ask you to unmute.
I'm here. Hi.
Here we go. Hello. I was kind of curious, what do you think might be the one single most, or the single best thing that a teammate could do to support an immigrant teammate?
One single thing. Okay. I think the best thing that they can do is just step back sometimes and give the space. Because oftentimes I would start talking about something and I process it in a different way, or I speak about it in a different way. And people would get impatient and try to help me by interrupting me and going a different direction. And I think the best thing they could do in that moment is step back and wait for me to call them and say, hey, like, now I'm ready for you to help me, instead of them assuming I need help because they might just not know what I need. So there is a lot in wanting to support your team members, but just remembering that you need to understand them first before you help them. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how did you personally decide what kind of the Polish cultures you wanted to keep versus what you wanted to adapt to, like the Canadian cultures?
I think I'm often making those decisions as I go, because there are certain things that a few years back I would never change. And I would say, this is the core of being Polish. And if you are telling me to change that, that is just rude, right? This is my culture. One of the examples was pronouns in English. Polish does not have a non-gender specific pronoun. The language does not support that. And for a long time, I would say, it's very hard for me to do that in English because my native language does not have it. And no matter how hard I try, my brain just thinks in gender binary. And over time, by having more and more friends who do that, and by understanding how to use it, and by just getting support in building that new language, I was able to start using the they, them pronouns, or any pronouns that someone has. And that was a decision I made based on immersing myself in the culture and going through that hard time of just changing how my brain thinks about English and things in English. So a lot of those decisions I make based on, how much happiness is going to bring me and people around me. Is it going to bring me closer to people that I want to be close with? And not necessarily is it going to make my life easier, because some of those things are surprisingly hard, but mostly like, can I get the support system to get there? And do I have a safe space to make mistakes around it? And by now, I don't really think there is anything I would say, I'm forever going to do it the Canadian way, or I'm forever going to do it the Polish way. I think they're just going to keep changing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Someone had mentioned in the Heartifacts live channel that they sometimes worry about feeling, some people might see them as a threat to local jobs, a threat. Did you face any of this when you went over to Canada? And do you have any suggestions for those that might?
Yeah, I have heard go back to your country a few times. I would say more so in the UK than in Canada, just because of the culture difference to my country. Like in Canada, it's not as pronounced. I usually just, if I'm in the space for a conversation with that person, if they're not aggressive, because if they're aggressive, I'm just walking away, right? There is no point in talking to an aggressive person. But if it was a coworker or, someone who feels comfortable speaking their mind, I would start being curious, like, why do you think that? Like, why do you think I should go back to my country? Why do you think I'm a threat to the job market here? Like, if my employer could find someone who's not an immigrant, I'm pretty sure they would hire a non-immigrant. It's way easier to hire Canadians than it is to hire Polish people in Canada. Why would they go through the trouble of getting me a job and pay me the same, because I'm not being paid less because I'm an immigrant, if they could just hire a Canadian person and never worry about the cultural differences and any immigration issues? Like, what makes you think I am doing this? I'm taking away someone's job. And I think that's a question of like, can you engage with this person or not? Do you feel safe to engage with them? Is this situation not threatening to you? And do you want to do that, right? Because sometimes it's just best to ignore them, because if you engage with them, they go off into more and more intense ideas. So I would make it more of a judgment call. But if you care about a relationship with this person, or maybe people who have a relationship with this person, try understanding what they are thinking about there.
Yeah. How somebody had said they were wondering how they could stand up for their coworkers when their bosses aren't treating them very well because their English isn't very good. So is there anything that a coworker could do, or is there anything a coworker did for you that was really helpful in some way?
I remember one situation. It was less about my English, it was about someone else's English. I was working in the UK and someone had a very thick Irish accent. And at that point, my English was pretty new and I couldn't understand them at all. They would speak to me and I would try and I just couldn't understand them. It was so hard. And I talked to one of my coworkers and I said, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to work with this person on a project, but I just cannot understand them for the life of me. I'm trying and I'm not getting there. So two things they did is they found a different reason for me to not be on a project with that person, because that would make it impossible for us to work. And then they actually sat down with me and started helping me understand Irish accents. We would watch videos and they would tell me what the videos were about, and we would talk, and slowly but surely I built up this understanding of the accent. So that was something I experienced. And then supporting my team members here in Canada, I've never experienced that in Canada, but I've seen other team members maybe not knowing what they're supposed to do when someone's English is not up to par in their opinion. And I was just very firm. I said, you do not correct someone if it does not change the meaning. You do not correct documentation, internal documentation, because somebody, forgot a V or an A, because PRs that are there just to correct someone's English when they're a software engineer are not great, because you're focusing on something else than the job is about, right? Like, you don't want to spend the time correcting their English if it does not, at the end of the day, matter. You're not there to do that. And if they ask you to help them with their English, only then you can do it. But they have been hired for this job. They're able to communicate. They're able to do their job. Unless it's interfering with what they're doing, you do not get to correct them. And even if you do, treat it as correcting anything else. Just remember, language skills are a skill as anything else, right? So they can grow and improve them, and everyone makes mistakes.